What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Matthew Moreno, Blake Williams, and guys, I expected this weekend series to be a little ho-hum, everything decided, and then some interesting comments, Matt, from Dave Roberts in the pregame. When asked about that Friday night's starting pitcher, Lance Lynn, and what his role on the postseason might be, the beginning of his answer was, I don't know yet. I'm going to be honest, Matt. This got me a little bit excited as a guy that had resigned myself to Lance Lynn as a game 3 starter. But tell us a little bit more about what Dave Roberts said, and let's discuss what this might mean moving forward.
Yeah, obviously, the past week, 10 days, Dodgers at this point have just been really evaluating, what their postseason pitching plan is going to be. And as we've discussed, the rookies are probably going to factor into that in some regard. And, considering the showing that they had in Coors Field against the Rockies, like it kind of further, I mean, obviously Bobby Miller's locked into, I think, starting game 2 of the NLDS, but so far Dave has only said one of the first 2 games. But Pepe and Sheehan really, specifically, and probably even Pepio more so than Sheehan in terms of possibly starting a postseason game for the Dodgers. And so, again, that is connected to kind of Lance Lynn, especially in the NLDS, where because of off days, you could get away with only needing 3 starters. And so, like you said, he started off by saying, I don't know yet. And that he had a conversation with Lance Lynn a couple weeks ago just to let him know that, hey, once the postseason rolls around, things could potentially change. And Dave Roberts didn't say that Lance Lynn isn't starting for them in the postseason, but he didn't commit to him, which I thought, considering, having been around Dave now for I don't know how many years, when he answers things this way, you kind of need to read the tea leaves and in between the lines. And so for him to basically not commit right away to Lance Lynn starting, I think is noteworthy and points to, maybe the Dodgers are going to surprise us a little bit, at least me, in terms of how they might approach some of their starters in the playoffs.
Blake, I'm with Matt on this one. The fact that Dave Roberts a couple weeks ago had a conversation with Lynn in which, as he was quoted today, is saying everything is on the table tells me that all of us that just assumed, well, of course, Lance Lynn is starting game 3. He's a veteran. It's Lance Lynn, yada, yada, yada. Clearly, for at least a couple of weeks, the Dodgers haven't been thinking that way. And that doesn't mean they won't end up there, especially because Lynn has been much better these past 3 starts. And yet, the fact that at one point they were considering taking him out of a spot that we all just assumed was his, I think that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it seems like a big deal, especially because I think we all agree, and probably most everyone watching this, he isn't one of their best 3 starters. And we all kind of just assumed he'd be there based on Robert's comments in the past saying they still trust him in the postseason and just being the veteran presence, they went out and traded for him. But if you're trying to win a 5-game series, you want to throw out your best pitchers every night.
Yeah.
And I don't think Lance Lynn is one of those guys. So if you're getting Pepio or Lance Lynn as your game 3 starter, I think pretty much everyone's going to take Ryan Pepio. And with their pitching the way it is, they're not really in a state where they can afford to kind of mess around with the middle of the rotation and hope it works out. Like, you have to just throw out your best starters. We don't know what version of Kershaw we're going to get. We don't know what we're going to get from Bobby Miller making his first postseason start. So you got to just throw out the best stuff and go with that. You can't just give the start to him because he's a veteran.
Yeah, Matt, Lynn has been a roller coaster as a Dodger, safe to say. Some really good starts, some really bad starts. It's worth pointing out that the last 3 starts have been better. I should say probably the last 4 starts. I believe he's at 9 earned runs over his last 4 starts. The strikeout numbers have ticked up a little bit. Friday night start, 6 innings, 2 hits, 2 earned, 4 walks, 4 strikeouts. The whiff rate, not great, 21%, but he's been better. That's what surprises me from the perspective of Dave Roberts making these comments in the midst of what has been a better run. If he had said this 2 weeks ago, it would have been like, well, of course, thank goodness. I'm surprised that even after Lynn had back-to-back 6 strikeout games ahead of Friday's start, this was the quote from Dave Roberts. Based on what he said today, again, he cracked open the door for the possibility that Lynn wasn't going to be the game 3 guy, but he definitely didn't commit to him not being the guy either, right?
Right. And, Dave Roberts was asked kind of, follow-up question of, hey, would Lance Lynn possibly coming out of the bullpen be an option? And he said, perhaps, but I then looked at Lance Lynn's history, his game logs. He hasn't really pitched out of the bullpen like at all since early in his career. So to me, like, I don't see that as a viable option. I think if anything, we'd be looking at a scenario where either he starts. And one thing Dave Roberts had also said over recent weeks was the Dodgers wanted Lance Lynn to sort of change his focus and approach in these starts and go more kind of full throttle from the very beginning, as opposed to being concerned with trying to conserve his energy so that he could get deep into the starts. Because he said in the playoffs, we're not going to need that. Like, we would much rather have him be more effective, maybe dominant pitcher, if you will, for 4 innings than have him provide any sort of length where maybe he struggles. So I don't see Lance Lynn coming out of the bullpen. I would see a scenario of maybe, he does start and he's a kind of glorified opener where he's going to give them, 4 innings type thing.
Yeah.
But I think also, as much as Lynn's some of his stats and recent outings have improved, I think the issue still, and we saw it on Friday night against the Giants, he's still walking a bunch of not a bunch, but I think too many for the Dodgers. And Eric Karros mentioned it on the broadcast, and I know Blake has brought it up with when we've discussed Kershaw. Are you going to get away with those walks and stranding as many runners as you have when it's not a team like the Giants or maybe the Rockies, no disrespect to, or the Padres, who are also eliminated from the postseason? Those 3 teams just happen to be coincidence that I them. And so I think that's something the Dodgers sort of factoring in, right? Like, if you start off, if you're facing, the Brewers kind of struggle to hit if that's who it is in the NLDS, but let's say the Dodgers advance, or just anybody. If you start a game walking to the first 2 batters you face in October, like, that's a lot different than doing it right now in September, especially for a team like the Dodgers where these games don't matter really.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear that the Dodgers have encouraged Lynn to go full throttle, because you look at Friday's line, 6 innings, 85 pitches. That doesn't sound like a guy that necessarily went full throttle. That sounds like a guy that was pitching to contact a little bit. Now, again, that's reading the box score, but I would have liked to see, him just throwing a lot more strikes and not walking 4 batters if the goal was go full throttle, pound the strike zone, throw your hardest stuff. And you almost would have liked to see him out of there by the 5th inning, just because he had nothing left in the tank. Let's close this real quick, Matt. As we record this show today, do you think Lance Lynn ends up being a Game 3 starter for the Dodgers?
Yes.
Blake?
I'll say no, just because of Robert's comments and kind of get some differing opinion on here. I'd say the most notable part of that is if he's not a starter for you, like, they shouldn't have him on the roster.
Yep.
And that potentially opens up a spot for Michael Grove. So Robert seemed to give him a lot of praise recently. So if you're kind of thinking we want to get Grove on the roster and not cut Yarbrough or someone like that, like, leaving Lynn off and putting him back for the NLCS roster if they make it there makes sense. It would be a way to have more relievers in the NLDS when you don't need as many starters. So I think if they're just going to go with their best arms, it's going to be Pepio Game 3, and then they'll carry the extra reliever.
It did not escape my notice either, Blake, that Michael Grove was mentioned in the quote that was connected to the Lance Lynn piece of this. He was asked about the rookie pitchers and how well they have done, and Grove was included in that. And so I'm with you. If he's going to be the starter, I've sort of resigned myself to it. I'm not going to quite say fine, but I'm expecting that. And to Robert's point, if the plan is, hey, Lance Lynn, can you get us 3 or 4 innings, throw as hard as you possibly can? There's worse outcomes. I'll put it that way. There's worse outcomes than that. And yet I would much prefer Ryan Pepio starting and Michael Grove being a guy who's available out of the bullpen just because of the stuff. I want to just mention this in closing Pepio's stuff. He has 7 earned runs in 6 appearances since coming back from injury for the Dodgers. He's allowed 23 hits in 33 innings, and he has a 26-3 strikeout to walk ratio. It's ridiculous. Like, these aren't, when I had the interview with Lance Brozdowski, it wasn't just, Pepio's been pretty good. Like, Pepio's been absurd. It's kind of crazy that we're even having a debate about whether or not he's the number 3 starter. I joke that he should probably be more in the conversation of should he be a number 1 or number 2 starter for the Dodgers. But all that said, I still think Lance Lynn's going to start Game 3. I still think he's on the playoff roster. So let us know what you think in the comments below. I'm curious. We're asking what you're predicting. I think all 3 of us would agree we would have Ryan Pepio in the number 3 spot. Matt, would you have Lance Lynn even on the postseason rotation, on the postseason roster?
Not for the NLDS. If he's not starting, then I agree with Blake and what you said is it doesn't make sense to keep him on the roster at that point. But I would see. I just don't know if that's a path the Dodgers want to go down. I don't know enough about Lance Lynn's psyche. if they could sell him on, hey,
He
you're
looks
off.
like a really stable guy. I'm sure
Yeah.
he would handle it great.
You're off the NLDS roster, but if we advance to the NLCS, not only will you be back on it, but we're going to need you to start a game at that point. I don't know how that conversation would go. I don't know if Lance Lynn would be able to, sort of accept that kind of outlook. But yeah, so if he's not going to start in the NLDS, then leave him off the roster. I think still just roll the dice and, like you guys have said, go with kind of your best options and best pitching staff because, as Andrew Friedman has said, it's going to be big boy stuff this October. So don't have time for feelings.
Blake will agree with me on this. If he's not on the NLDS roster and they play the Braves in the NLCS, he cannot be on the NLCS roster either. Put Emmett Sheehan and a bullpen game in Game 4, right, Blake?
I mean, they should probably do that, but I think Lance Lynn would end up being that guy. And to Matt's point about how Lynn would handle that, I think that's kind of what Dave Roberts' strength is. Like, he would sit down with him and kind of get him to buy into that. Like, he's not over there running the Padres where they don't get the way they want and everything turns into a circus and they fall out of the contention. Like, Dave Roberts is pretty good at managing that stuff. And considering where Lance Lynn was a few months ago with a near 8 ERA on a team that was selling all their key pieces, like, I think you can probably live with sitting out for a round and then helping in the NLCS and getting those playoff checks. I think you'll still be happy about that.
All right, I think we checked all the boxes. We got big boy stuff. We got multiple digs in on the Padres, so I think we're finished here. As always, folks, we appreciate you joining us. But seriously, I would like to know, do you think Lance Lynn is on the NLDS roster? And do you think Lance Lynn is starting Game 3 of the NLDS for the Dodgers? That's Matt Moreno. That's Blake Williams. My name is Jeff Spiegel. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, folks. And of course, go Dodgers.